Bob, thank you much for the introduction. My name is Colin. I lead our experience design capability at Centric. I first wanted to start off by level setting on what employee experience is nowadays, and it is a revenue driver. When you look at what organizations are trying to do with their employees, they're trying to make sure that their brand is represented up and down their value chain for their customers, which means that the employee experience is a critical part to the success of the organization. And when Bob and team and I were chatting, we were going through some examples of how to make that relevant for everybody. And one of the good examples before we jump into slides is you look at Uber. And Uber's experience for their employees took a big hit, 2 years ago, when they had all these issues with the behavior of their senior management team. And they started seeing those people either leave or get forced out. And it was detrimental to the revenue growth of the organization because the employee experience was bad. People didn't want to work there. People on the other side, the customers weren't using the app, right? Lyft had a huge spike in demand because people didn't want to use Uber. Well, that sentiment is never been more true now as we look at where we are as an entity of organizations across the world with COVID. Now, we're not trying to say that we're addressing COVID with a lot of this. The idea of remote work, the idea of digital tooling has been manifesting itself for quite a while, and real estate investments have become the forefront of cost cut measures for years. So COVID was an accelerator. It really wasn't a catalyst per se. It's a little bit of it was happening already. So I think it's important for people to realize that that employee experience really does affect the outcome of businesses and growth opportunities. So as we think about the definition of what employee experience is, take it to mind that it does actually affect the overall customer experience and therefore the outcome of the business. I am now going to share my screen. So the stance that Centric takes on employee experience is actually rooted in what we call employee ecology. And it's a psychological principle or theory around how different parts of people's worlds collide, and that organizations need to start to further use psychological principles in defining what those experiences are for their employees. When you look at what those ecologies are, there's some pretty big words here in small letters: micro, meso, exo, and macro. And what it really is saying is that on the far left-hand side are the more intimate things that affect a person's everyday, their family, their the immediate things that live around them. And the far right side are things that influence them that happen in the everyday world and everything in between. Where businesses fall is in this mesosphere, this meso ecosystem, if you will. And people are being influenced by the business to a degree, by the people within the walls of the business, by the things that they see, the things that they do, but they are also getting those exposures and those influences outside of just the organization. And that every day is very different right now. And all these ecosystems are colliding, and organizations need to start to understand how to take these principles and apply them to organizational design, operational design, and how to change managerial norms. When you kind of take a step back and say, how does this kind of all go together? You look at a graphic like this and then say, wow, the most important thing to a person is their microsystem, but the mesosystem is just as critical because it's the second closest thing they do every day. The further you get out in these rings, the further the influence actually is in terms of what the person believes. But this theory has to understand that these influences are never going to go away. So if you were to put the work environment in the mesosphere, you would understand that it's really close to the person and it's going to influence them negatively or positively. And one of the other examples that we were talking about when we were thinking about how to position this was organizations that are doing this really well and understanding how they all balance and go together. And one of the examples I gave was Lowe's Home Improvement has a belief in making sure their employees feel what their customers feel. And they have a motif that is rooted in making their employees feel three things: appreciated, confident, and unstoppable. That is the same thing they want their customers to feel. So when they go through all of their branding exercises and all their experiential design exercises, they want to make sure that those three things are built into all of their solutions, all their ways of working, and all the things they do with and for customers. And it's actually gone up to the point where they use it in decision making. If you can't justify a decision you're about to make with those three things, then you're actually not doing what that motif says we should be doing. The reason the motif even exists because they understood that the mesosystem and the microsystem had to work as closely together as possible because their employees are also their consumers. So they knew that they had to make sure that they, as the employees, felt the same way their customers did. So I'm going to go back up a slide real quick. There are certain things that we know are kind of what we've learned in the past couple of months. People's everyday lives are different. Kids are at home, kids are not at home, kids are going back to school. Someone said earlier, you got 12 hours to figure out if your kids are going to school tomorrow or not. All those things are making the everyday life very, very different, where the person has to make judgment calls really quickly. And these are all stressors. And these stressors are adding to the inability for people to produce probably the value that they should be at times for an organization. And at the same time, the organization has to be a bit flexible in understanding that that's okay. I think when you look at certain industries, they've done really well to profit by where we are as a state of the economy. And Lowe's is a really good example of that. A lot of Amazon e-commerce, obviously. And a lot of those businesses have been able to sustain their positioning without changing much, and that's okay. But other organizations aren't so lucky, where they're having to dramatically shift how they do things. But what they're not shifting is their goals and objectives. They're more shifting how they get work done. So more digital tools, more digital interactions, more ability for people to meet in different ways. So those things are going to be part of the norm. And most of where we see a lot of companies focusing on is either on the technology side or on the operational side, because they don't have the ability to make those adjustments very quickly. They don't have the resiliency built into their operating models. And then the employees are frustrated because they don't have the proper things to get their work done every day. So that becomes a negative impact to engagement, but it also reflects that they don't feel the brand or the company was ready for something like this. And does that make them more confident that the company is going to be able to withstand some of this or change into something better? And people start to get fearful, and that trust doesn't exist. So the companies that have this less resiliency are harder for them to adapt to where the world is going. And it also forces people into the idea that they've got to make some really rash business decisions and change course or spend more dollars in certain areas that they didn't think they had to before. But again, this is only accelerated by COVID. It's not necessarily the catalyst for it. It was going to happen eventually anyway. One other really good example of this is the trucking industry. You're going to see that the trucking industry is going to force everybody to have electric vehicles. Well, that's fine. And in theory, it sounds great. But the truckers who are owner operators, which is a large portion of the trucking landscape, can't afford to buy a electric truck. You know, when Tesla comes out and says we're gonna have this super truck, that's fine. It's awesome. It's really good for the environment, but it's not realistic for the owner operator to do that. So that pressures these smaller businesses that run a lot of our shipping and logistics environment to force them into change they can't even take on right now. So that is an additional stressor. So an example of how it's negatively affecting the organization as a whole with mom and pops. While the systems kind of function independently of them, the new ecology has to understand that there is the human need, me as a person, and I still have the employee need, and those things have to come together to make things work in the right way. And it has to start by understanding where you are today. And not enough organizations are putting the plan together to say, where are we in the maturity of our employee experience? What are we doing right now that's working? What are we doing right now that's not working? And plotting a course for where they need to go. They have to understand both sides of the idea of need, but they're not in a place right now where they have enough of that information to make the smartest decisions. And this is not at fault of anybody's. It's somewhat of a new way of thinking that we have to mature our employee experience, but not a lot of people understand how. There are proven models that are out there around how to mature from one end of the spectrum to the other. But you have to start off with that foundation, and that foundation really starts with understanding how these ecosystems are colliding and getting to that level of empathy with the employees to understand what's important to them in regards to their work environment, what they think about the brand, what they think about their fellow employees, what they think about their managers, all those things that affect their everyday working environment needs to be brought in to say, okay, how do you feel about these things? That level of empathy really can't be more powerful right now than anything else. It's the mechanism that's going to make employees want to work for a place that creates this enviable culture, because you are listening to the employees, you are bringing in their voice. And what we thought would be interesting to show everybody is what that might look like from a maturity model standpoint, where most organizations don't necessarily have a structured format like this. They do have some level of what they could start. What I mean by that is managers are having dialogues with their employees, and management teams together are having dialogues around their employee experience and what their people are feeling. And leadership teams are getting that information from their management teams and using it to some degree to do change management, to do communications, to do all these things, to make some decisions on technologies and toolings, which is great, but it's not formalized. So if you were to formalize a voice of the employee program to start off to build that empathy layer, to understand how those ecosystems are colliding, you can start to understand what the future of your employee experience should be based on what people are telling you they want it to be, which is ultimately going to help productivity and engagement, which is ultimately going to help with growth, okay? And a lot of organizations need to start on the far left here, which is create a vision and have that systematic feedback in place to allow for people to provide that voice. And as you evolve, you start to earn the right to make change happen. So where you see learning commit, those are really environments that are based on learning and learning agendas. So what is it that we want to learn now? What is it that we want to use? What data do we need to make decisions? And how do we leverage those people to help us make those decisions? There is a lot of reporting in these middle stages, but there is also a very large commitment to that voice being heard up and down the leadership chain, all the way up to your C-level executives who say, what do the employees think? Asking those questions so they can get the answers from the data that you have, stuff that you've collected through these Voice of the Employee programs, will allow them to understand and build that level of commitment with their employees to say, I am listening to you and here's where we are going. The companies that excel at this have completely changed their cultural norms. They've moved to a position of, I am ready to commit to having my employees actually drive this for me, where I've got people who are individual contributors all the way up to me on a team together, committed with each other to make this the place that we want it to be. What are the things that we need? What are the things that we should keep doing, stop doing, start doing, so they can evolve together? It isn't going to be a place where we can allow the leadership team to simply make decisions on their own for what's best for the employees without the right data and the proper mechanisms in place for them to really move forward. And there's some really good examples of where this doesn't work. And we kind of talked about a couple that do. In the financial services world, this is very much a graphic used at one of the larger banks that I will not name, but I'm sure you can guess by the statement that they are having difficulties with their regulators for years now because of some improper behaviors. I'm sure you can figure out which bank I am talking about, where they didn't necessarily understand the microsystems and how the people were feeling around what the brand said it stood for and how people said your company doesn't actually believe in that at all. So the peers and the family environment was actually influencing the employees to say, you know what, you're right, they don't. And they saw an attrition of employees because they didn't believe that the brand actually represented themselves the right way. The behaviors that were done by leadership was improper. They don't feel as if that was the right place for them to work. So it actually became an attrition mechanism, which is obviously not good. Since then, that same company has tried to go through transformation where they are brought in new leadership, they are changing how they do business to a degree, and yet the fatigue that has set in from the people hearing the lip service for so long is still an attrition mechanism. And the employee experience is not actually delivering the value that it should for them. And they're losing 3% of their workforce on an annual basis. This is mostly in the technology space. But they're losing 3% of their workforce, which is a fair chunk of people when you're working in an organization of 250,000 people. So it's an example of where this idea of ecology, while prevalent in what they say, they actually don't do it, and the employees are recognizing it, and they're losing those employees. So I'd like to stop there and see if there's any questions or comments or anything really around how we approach this idea from more of a psychological standpoint.
I'm curious what you're hearing about, people wanting to work from home now, and even when we come out of COVID, what it's going to do with that workplace versus work at home experience. Because I know some people and some businesses, you want to have your colleagues come together, build teams and all of that. But on the other hand, with the work-life balance, and people like the idea of working from home, even part-time. So any reactions to that?
Yeah, so great question. I think there's a lot of data that says the work from home thing works, and there's a lot of data that says it doesn't work. And the productivity up, down, revenue up, down. So there's, things all over the board. Most of the research that we've done around this topic, which is a blend of our experience design capability and our people and change capability, right? So we're kind of flexing up and down the channels and whatnot within organizations. They would like some form of collaboration. And the idea of using WeWork or models like that, where you can get flex space to get teams together, is actually where a lot of people want to go. People who are productive from home want to stay from home, but they do feel that they're not getting the socialization needed to make sure that the rest of their teams feel that they're as productive as they should be as a teaming model. And there are also people who just don't work well from home, who you need to keep an eye on, who need to be in more of a structured environment inside the walls. So there is probably a bit of a employee segmentation that's needed to understand who can work from home, who can't, and create a balance of those things. Yep. Managers are the same way. We had a conversation with Bob and team the other day around management styles have to change, because you used to manage people who you physically saw every day, and now you physically don't see them. So how are you adjusting your management style to that? That's a very unique model or problem where people are having to adjust how the people are managed, because you can't see them work every day. And if the productivity is down, how are you going to take a look at what they're doing? How are you going to look at whether it's an influence of all of these systems, or is it an influence of just one system, the meso system specifically, because that's where the work environment is? So how do you make sure that you're managing the right way? So that's one thing that the physical nature of being with someone is a little bit easier to do, as opposed to it being in the remote place. I don't think everybody's going to stay remote. What we are seeing is that there are organizations looking at their real estate investments and making some decisions on how to truncate some of the physical locations, but the whole remote working forever thing is probably not something that's going to stay around based on what we're hearing. And it's a lot to do with the interaction people want with their colleagues to make sure they're doing the right work at the right time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very similar to what we're seeing as well. So
I think we skewed that we skewed so far to the remote environment, and we probably needed to, right? Forget your political stance or your stance on the situation. The smart thing to do is, okay, we got to go remote right now because we got this pandemic. But there were companies that did it before the pandemic have also realized it didn't work. That same financial services company that I mentioned went to a complete flex model, and their productivity dropped dramatically. So they had literally, if you didn't go to the office 3 days a week or more, you no longer had a desk. You actually got a flex space because they knew you weren't coming in. And what they started to do is shrink their real estate down in San Francisco and Charlotte and New York. And what they noticed was their productivity went down. So they started forcing people to come in at least 3 days a week, but only to those flex spaces. Their real estate investment didn't change. They just needed to get the people back to the office because they weren't getting the level of productivity they expected. And they do that by badge scanning, right? So they know how many days a week people are in the office, and they can look at the people's performance based on how many days they came in and out. And the people who were successful and stayed at home were told, you're successful and can stay at home. The people who were not as successful in terms of their productivity, who didn't go to the office, were told they need to come to the office more. But then the management team of those people, if they were in the same cities, which in that environment, not always the case, had to be present as well, because the person physically needed to be a bit more managed.
Thank you, Colin. Can you, now we need to
Yes.
switch the screen, right? So
Yep, I will do that. Go ahead.
And I will share my screen.
While Patricia's putting up the slides, I have to say I loved the whole framework that Colin showed around the various ecology ecosystems. It's funny because when we founded Gage and McDonald 22 years ago, we founded it with the dream of changing the world one dysfunctional company at a time. And the reason for that was the feeling that people's experience and the way they feel about their families, their community, their church really bleeds from how they're feeling about where they spend the majority of their time, which is at work. So it was just interesting to see how Colin had framed that. It really got me thinking a lot. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Gage and McDonald, and then we'll go into our presentation. So we're a strategy execution firm, and we really focus on transformation and change. We're a certified women-owned business, and what we've really been interested in through the years is how do you really look at a company's culture, its leadership, its communication, and how do we really use design to engage employees in everything the company's trying to do. These are a few of our clients, and thanks, Bob, you mentioned some of them earlier, but we're very used to working with very large, complex global companies, many of whom are going through very significant change, and I guess you could say who isn't, right? These are just some of the industries. We work across industries and sectors, and just have had the opportunity to do a lot of interesting work around strategy shifts, merger and integration, culture, employee engagement, and many things like that. So what I thought I'd do is to start this conversation, just start it by framing this, and this is sort of a tell on us. In March, we set out, when we were seeing things become so disrupted, we said, wow, you know, we have a lot of our clients trying to figure out what's going on, what's happening, and we wrote a white paper. And the white paper was really around a progression path of how to come out of what at that point we thought was a 3-month issue. Remember that? When we all were like, oh, we're going to hunker down, we're going to come out in 3 months, and then it was 6 months. And so originally, we thought the path would be to mitigate the anxiety and uncertainty, to establish that new normal, learn how to thrive in the new normal, and then, of course, fuel reinvention. Very quickly, probably by June, we realized, wow, that paper is way off base. And this is all about embracing the abnormal and really creating and cultivating organizational resilience. And what we mean by organizational resilience, and Colin had talked about this as well, is really the ability of a company to prosper year over year in what's really a dynamic, interconnected world that's full of disruption. And it's how do you become adaptive, agile, robust, all the things we just heard about. And building organizational resilience really expands your employees' capacity to manage change. And it's around how you quickly seize opportunities to gain a competitive advantage. But it also requires new ways of working, and also requires attention on well-being. And fueling reinvention, that final stage, is all not about snapping back like to pre-COVID form, but really emerging a different company. And I saw some of the questions in the chat about what's going to happen with culture. We're seeing quite dramatically that companies are really rethinking many aspects of their culture, their systems, their structure. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I want to get through some of these slides quickly because we'd love to show you some real case studies and examples of what people are doing. We also, when we send out the slides, we'll put our website on the slides because you can get all these papers. We have papers on many things, including culture, that you can get on our website. So let's just look at, Patricia, if you give me the next slide. You know, one of the things that I think the ultimate question is, how do you really become future ready? And how do you embrace the technology while really staying in touch with human needs? And I love this quote that the world's moving so fast, we have few true experts on tomorrow. All we have are experts on yesterday. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, because this is also turning things upside down for companies, and certainly in the HR world, when many people that are in our organizations have 20 years of experience, but it's not necessarily the experience we need for the next 20 years. So if you think about that, what are some of the real challenges we've seen from our HR colleagues? And so here are many things that we've been hearing, as well as what we've been seeing from the research. Everything from driving perpetual business transformation to workplace agility, rethinking culture, reshaping capabilities with data analytics, building a future-ready workforce, ensuring a more diverse, inclusive workplace, the blending HR skills to fill jobs of the future. These things are all coming at you fast and furious. So it's like, no wonder you're tired, right? So what we thought we'd do is just take a pause and do a quick poll. If Stephanie, are you able to help us with that poll? There we go. So these, what we have up now are what you just saw in the boxes on the slide. And what we're curious is, which of these challenges is your greatest concern? So we're kind of coalescing around rethinking culture and leadership, building a future-ready workforce, driving perpetual business transformation, somewhat related. Interesting. Yeah, this will be interesting as we have the breakouts too.
Yeah, I think the combination of the perpetual business transformation with rethinking culture and leadership is really an interesting combination.
We've seen a lot too that, you know, as we just talked about with the virtual workforce, employees are noting, you know, just how difficult the whole blending of work-life balance really is.
Mm-hmm.
And also it's changing the role that companies see for themselves in terms of how they play in that. I think, you know, we often say, what COVID has done is leaders now, instead of reading the book, they're watching the movie. You know, we used to look at employee surveys and hear that people were stressed, they were juggling too much, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very easy to think about that rationally, but when you're a leader and you're on Zoom with someone and you see their child crying, mommy, mommy, or daddy, daddy, help me. You see the cat walking across the screen, everything going on. You suddenly, it really viscerally hits you what people are dealing with. So let's move on. Patricia, if you can take me to the next. So here's part of what we're seeing now in terms of, you know, Bob had mentioned the whole idea of the importance of trust and what's happening really in employees' experience. And what we've seen is we're seeing a movement of shifting from being engaged to being fulfilled. And what you can see on this screen are some of the ways that that's changing, that where employees used to really, we talked about engagement as, you know, getting people involved in what they do, their values. You know, it's often discussed as very transaction based. and segmented. Now what we're seeing is people are really pushing back on I'm more than what I do. We see this with the racial and social justice movement, for example. We see people very driven by purpose and really wanting to know how things really fit in that bigger scheme of things. And that it's not about transactions anymore. The whole game is trust. And business models, they're no longer static and really designed to like preserve. They're dynamic and designed to adapt and to really compete. And communications that once were, very segmented are now very personalized. We don't think, for a long time, we used to think of people in big buckets, manufacturing workers or desk-bound employees. Now we're really seeing it as very personalized. And the need to understand, like employees wanting to know the trends of what's going on, they're watching for the signals. And by the signals, we mean everything from how is my leader showing up? Where do they spend their time? If we're tight on budget, what gets cut first? What are all the signs? And people are watching those things very carefully. The other thing, if we go to the next slide, Patricia, I think
Yeah.
you were going to take.
Well, I was going to comment that, it's not only the workplace of the future driving change, the employee of the future is shifting how we work as well. And what a lot of the things that we're seeing, looking at employees and the research that we're doing and the conversations we're having with clients, is really understanding how the power dynamic within companies is shifting to the employee. And now with pervasive social networks that are democratizing workplace information, it's increasing information, even in access for job seekers as well as employees. And there is if you've been following the news, and I think as Bob mentioned, as we tee this off, there's employee activism is on the rise, and it's significantly driving leaders and companies to step up and change. And as Meryl mentioned, if we look at some of these, employees are seeking relevant, meaningful, more personalized experiences. This is something that they are, as Colin mentioned, experiencing as a consumer. They want that same experience at work. Companies, they're demanding companies are more connected, transparent, more human. We're seeing with the pandemic that everyone's expecting a safe work environment. How can we guarantee that? How can you customize work when you're in a virtual work environment? If you're part of an alternative workforce, what experience do you have? And I think in this sort of work anywhere, anytime, and sort of new world of work, people are really craving these work-life balance. And as we mentioned, experiences that promote well-being across multiple dimensions. And more it has to be work that is meaningful to me. And I think that this employee of the future is also definitely thinking about their career in a different way, and also wants to use new ways to communicate and collaborate. And they're also pushing, I think, Meryl, if we go to the next slide here, the changing expectations.
Yeah, so we just thought this would be some great data for you guys to have if you don't already. So, by 2025, which used to seem a long way away, it no longer is, millennials will have 75% of the global workforce. And what we know is that young adults 18 to 29, which are really Gen Z, have very little confidence in business leaders. 88% of millennials want to work for a company whose values reflect their own, and the cost of turnover when it doesn't is costing the economy $30.5 billion annually. You think of how dramatic that is. And what we're seeing in all of this is that companies really need to, they're finding themselves really struggling in dealing with equity, like creating a fair, just workforce for all employees. We're seeing career development and the increased focus on developing employees more important than ever, and having really meaningful work. And a lot of that is around helping people really connect the work that they do to something that's bigger than themselves. There's also been a need for a communication model that drives relevance and clarity and inspiration, not just information. And if we look at the next slide, what this has done is it's really changed what we mean by engagement. and this comes back to the topic of today's conversation, that engagement is really the life cycle of an employee's experience. And it's their experience physically, emotionally, psychologically, as well as behaviorally. And it's a deep connection to the company and to its purpose. It's that stickiness factor. And highly engaged people are those who feel safe and supported, and therefore they behave in productive ways. What it's not, and in some ways I think too often in companies has become, is it's a number on a survey. It's a short-term initiative. We think of it as satisfaction or happiness, or just a messaging mechanism. Or, we often think of engagement as one owned by one function. We see this a lot where we work with our clients where different functional heads are fighting over who owns employee engagement. We all own employee engagement. All leaders do.
And I think that perspective is really important because, as we were talking about earlier, employee experience is really the key to a better customer experience. And really understanding what the employee experience is, building on, how you teed up engagement, Meryl. It's really looking at all aspects. That it's multidimensional. It's physical, emotional, and digital. And you have to connect across all these worlds. And I think this has become even more heightened of a need given the experience with COVID, where before, we were talking about culture, and culture was driven by, shared experiences in a physical workplace. Now it's concurrent experiences over Zoom. So the challenge to really build an employee experience and, build the capability for leaders to lead in a virtual workplace is really taking on a whole new meaning. And you can see here, this is what the best employers do. They bring together all these experiences in new ways, and they really look at it from the employee perspective out. They have to build belief, trust, and confidence, and through this alignment of action, where the belief actually aligns with the values, aligns with the action. And then really using storytelling as a tool to drive those not only rational but emotional levers and connect people more strongly to the organization. And we see that employee experience gets results. And I just wanted to give you a few statistics here. There was a recent report from Forbes Insights and Salesforce that showed 70% of executives agree that improved employee experience leads to improved customer experience, which leads to more rapid revenue growth. And customers who perform in the top 25% of employee experience measures achieve 2 times the innovation and customer satisfaction and 25% higher profits. So creating, across an employee experience across performance, aspiration, engagement, and recognition is not an easy thing to do. So we wanted to share some employee experience accelerators, and this we'll just walk through quickly some case studies examples. And what we're seeing is that these are some of the key accelerators that our clients are coming to us and looking to us to help to drive a stronger experience and also drive engagement. And we're going to bring this to life by showing you some examples of this work across all of these elements. So with culture, this is an example of really around aligning and inspiring employees around shared values. And for 75 years, J&J has provided, they have a credo that's provided a set of values to guide employees around the world. And at the 75th anniversary, they created an experience to really connect and unify their employees to recommit to the tenets and celebrate the enduring impact that not only the company but its credo has on the world. And so to create this high impact experience, they designed a 6-month global engagement plan, and that included the company's first ever Credo Day and development of a microsite so it was sort of freedom within a framework. So locations across the world could implement their own Credo Day in a 48-hour period. And they also engaged leaders through a global town hall with 2-way live video, connecting employees and leaders across sites around the world in real time to have real conversation and dialogue about what the Credo means and recommitting as a company to their culture and values. And this next example is a new business leader really wanted to inspire renewed energy in the company's shared mission and commitment to patients. And the first step was really to identify culture ambassadors. It was a very simple program, high-touch campaign, really equipping employees inside the organization in sort of this peer-to-peer model to create an employee experience. So there was a whole set of tools and programming that was and communications that connected to really support these ambassadors to bring the culture of Ethicon to life. And then communication. This has been really interesting, especially in today's environment, and looking at internal communications, not just as an information delivery, but really helping to connect people and minimize information overload. You know, the amount of data that employees are processing at work is not only the only issue, it's the amount of irrelevant data. And I think a multi-channel communications approach to really equip leaders to connect employees at all levels, and then to engage employees in a dialogue and in much more personalized, segmented communications, as well as making sure there's omni-channel delivery, so you're not overloading your organization primarily through email communications, and really thinking about centralized resources. How do we help people really get the information they need in a timely, relevant manner? And how do we establish communication channels that let employees receive ideas and quick responses from managers and colleagues? This is an interesting project. This was about creating a relevant, personalized experience. And employees, as we talked about, are not only looking for meaningful work, but they're looking for purpose. So this is a campaign that we worked on with the Coca-Cola company, and it was called My Drop. And it's a leader-led experience. It's a half-day session, and it takes employees on a journey through their manifesto for growth, which is their strategy, and it helps them to identify and express the ways in which they actually help the company deliver on its strategy. And this was rolled out to 70,000 employees around the world, and eventually was included in their overall corporate reputation and social responsibility campaigns, because some of the actions that the employees were taking were beyond the walls of the company itself and really having a greater impact. Once again, so this is another way to think about personalization and connecting, is really looking at personas. And you don't need a lot of these, but this really helps you understand the employee experience and how to, I think, better deliver not only communications, but really interact and set up the right level of systems to create that multi-channel communication environment. And leadership visibility. So I think this is really important in really equipping leaders, and there's many ways to do this. And because leaders have this incredible platform to shape and influence the employee experience in every way imaginable. So making them better storytellers, providing them with information, reinvigorating them through their own sort of leadership experiences to improve their commitment, and really providing them direct access to the latest information and communication materials, libraries of research, videos, things that help them become better leaders and better communicators, and really looking at creating leadership experiences that can influence and improve the employee experience. There's also interesting work that's being done where, if we think about connecting to purpose, is looking at social impact. So this is a program that really inspired and activated employees at all stages of their career to contribute across the different volunteer programs and really make an impact on the community. And this really was a critical engagement tool for Johnson & Johnson, because it really shaped how these employee experiences, and they were shared to show how the employees were connecting to purpose. And it was a creative campaign that was activated through print and digital, and it was shared across many internal social channels, Yammer, LinkedIn, Twitter, as well, internal and external social channels. And this is a storytelling example, once again, helping connect to purpose, that was done by Janssen Pharmaceuticals. And they designed and executed a multi-layered plan to tell an even more compelling story about the company commitments to its patients. And what this did, it was really helped align leaders and to tell the story, to create a richer employee experience about what the company was doing on behalf of patients, and inspired employees to see themselves in that story. This is also work that was done on Talent Brand, and we see this as another key accelerator, really looking at talent trends and aligning them with the company's business strategy and HR priorities. And this was a way that J&J was really preparing leaders across the organization to understand what type of talent is needed to be future ready, and then create that experience so people could, employees of the company could shape their careers against that talent story. And then finally, the last accelerator is belonging and contribution. And we're seeing a lot more attention to telling much more compelling D&I stories. So the example on the left is really looking at what's the communications impact? How are we communicating DE&I across our organization, and what needs to be changed in the way we're talking about it, the way we're leading it, the way we're communicating it from the employee point of view. So once again, to create a new experience around DE&I for employees. And the same thing on the right is looking at understanding how to really connect DE&I storytelling to the foundation of the company. And this is an example from, once again, from J&J. And they were inspired because 130 years ago, 8 of their first 14 employees were female. And this inspired a mindset for a campaign they call You Belong. And so those are sort of some quick ideas around the accelerators. And I think we want to move to a breakout discussion.
So maybe we should ask the group, because
Yeah.
it seemed like there was a lot of interest in questions and having a discussion, and we have, what, 20 minutes left? Is that right, Bob?
Yeah.
Yes, we do. Thank you both. That was a great discussion. And part of the way we kind of measure this is the amount of chat that happens in the chat room. And you guys were, all three of you were creating such dynamic chats. We do want to go to at least one breakout session, I think, maybe for about 5 minutes or so, and we'll be randomly put into groups, and we could address the questions that you had asked. And are we ready to end? By the way, if people want to restart their video, we're at that moment where we can come back together, so to speak. Right, Jim? Is that right? There's Jim. Okay. There we go. There's my gallery view. I see all the great faces. So again, the questions, Patricia, why don't you tee us up again with the questions you want us to contemplate? Quick point of order, when you get into your group, if one person could just take some quick notes and then just either drop them into the chat feature when we come back, or email them to either me or Stephanie, and then that way we could kind of capture some of the great insights and introspections that you guys have. So let's go into a breakout room to talk about what has resonated with you so far the most, and how are you designing a more people-centric employee experience within your own organization, and any other great nuggets that you may have. Stephanie, are you ready to throw us into a breakout session for, let's do 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and wrap up.
Okay, perfect.
Welcome back, everybody. Do we want to, we've got a few minutes left. Why don't we open it up to two things? Any, if anybody wants to kind of just quickly report out any major points that came up in your breakout sessions, as well as, let's get into questions and answer, or questions for our great presenters. And, so let's kind of open the floor to the group. I guess I'll start off. We had a great discussion in our group about, one of the things that resonated with us was the fact that, we're really trying to engage a remote workforce, and that has its challenges. And that was something that came from our group. How about others?
I'd say in our group, well, what we kind of closed with was, that the pandemic has forced a lot of people kind of into more operational concerns and not thinking about some of these larger issues. But it is, in fact, a great opportunity to try new and different ways of engaging people. And if we're ever going to get to fulfilled employees, we have to do things new and different. And this is a great opportunity to try it. And sometimes leaders are a little bit scared in the current environment to try those new things, but it's a great opportunity right now to try new ways of communicating, listening, paying attention to people, and especially millennials are really open to that.
Larry, I think one of the things you hit on there is you have to have a fail fast mentality so you can test those things. You don't have to be so, let me get it right the first time and spend time to get there. That culture, especially the millennials, they don't care. If you tell them, hey, we're going to test some things, here they are, and then test them, they're going to be okay with it. Yeah. You have to understand there's an aging out population of the workforce. There are so many more millennials coming into the workforce than there are people exiting. You're going to have this shift in behavioral dynamics where that idea of empowerment that someone was talking about earlier in the chat is going to be huge. They're a why culture. As long as you give them the information, they're going to be okay with you failing and failing fast. As long as you try different things to make their world better, they're going to be okay with it. They just want to know that what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then go do it.
Yeah, and I think this idea of failing fast is really interesting because it is linked to you're learning. If you're learning from it, it's a growth mindset, and that really creates a more resilient organization. And so I think that's a great concept to really think about and explore, how you can make that happen inside your organizations.
There's another interesting thing. I'm on the board of American University in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Fanta Ah, who runs all of our campus life and all of our student body issues, reminds us all the time that Gen Zs and millennials, if they weren't part of the solution, it never happened. And I thought, that's actually a really interesting thing to think about. So I'm always channeling Fanta. It's like, yep, it didn't happen unless they were part of it.
I love that. Well, as a subject matter expert in failure, I could only tell you that I do want to point out that we have in the past, just a little plug for the HR leadership group in Northeast Ohio, we have had discussions on employee experimentation and organizational experimentation. Mm-hmm. So that's great. That resonates with us well. Any other questions? I see about 5 minutes left before we wrap up.
Alex, there's something you hit on here with the idea of the uncomfortable, and that's a reality. And I think the other word to throw in there is the uncontrollable, that you've got to be able to have that resiliency built into the fact that there are things that you are abnormal and uncontrollable. So how do you there are certain things in the organization that are going to be mainstays that don't have to change that much, but the other things do. And how do you look at the business and say what is stable and what is not? And that's like a linchpin to understanding how to create your resiliency. And that abnormal and uncomfortable and unknown, that's not going to change, right? It's going to have to be built into how you look at things. It's a good point.
So Colin, sorry, Mark.
Ladies first.
So Colin, when you talk about looking at the stable, are you recommending a conversation about both of those things? Right,
Yeah.
we're focused on creating a fail fast culture, and it's making a lot of people uncomfortable. And so trying to figure out how do we build in some resiliency and comfort and drive that fail fast culture.
Yeah, like fail fast is rooted in agile ways of working. Most people kind of put that together. So the way you run agile doesn't change, right? There are cadences and ceremonies. So that's one of those standards, right? Those things that aren't going to change. What you put into that model may change, right? So you kind of have to look at it and say, what are those things that we know we can control that are probably not going to change as much, and create almost like a governed foundation of things. And then the uncontrollable are things that happen in and around it, because there's a certain portion of the business operationally and organizationally that aren't going to change. And your C-level suite, for instance, probably not going to change, right? And how it's structured, not going to change. But the way that you empower your people is going to change. The way that you engage those people downstream is going to change.
Colin, and going back to your banking example, which I think everybody knows who it is, what I think is interesting, it's they're not failing fast. It is death through 1,000 cuts, and with no end in sight. It just becomes what's the next injury that they have, which they have to take care of, versus a truly aggressively taking on a new culture.
Yeah, that's an example of where literally the government is trying to step in to help them because they can't get out of their own way. Mm-hmm. They, in the next 2 years, may be forced to sell off some of their businesses that they know they shouldn't be running. Their investment management business, their asset management business, they may be selling those off because the organizational dysfunction with the size they are, the beast that they are, is almost impossible to permeate change. And their leadership team can't go to Capitol Hill or continue to go to Capitol Hill and say, we're doing this, and then not show the results. So they're looking at selling off some of the businesses because they can't permeate the change fast enough through this large of an organization. And that's just a sheer fact of how they've grown. And unfortunately for them, I mean, there's not a lot they can do.
At one time, they would have been on the list of too big to fail.
Right. And now they're on a list of too big to modernize and get better.
Spoken like a true ex-banker, Mark.
Sorry.
You know, when you think about getting people over the fear of trying things, one thing I find helpful is to talk about a concept that Jim Collins talks about, who wrote Good to Great, Built to Last. All of his research over, decades now has shown that really sustainable companies are good at what he calls shooting bullets, not cannonballs. And the idea is you hold your big resource, and what you have less of, the cannonballs, until you've totally calibrated your aim with the bullets. So it's the idea, like if you're shooting at another ship, and first figure out, am I aimed in the right way? And then once you've hit your mark, you shoot your cannonball. Mm-hmm. So talking to employees about, let's try a bunch of different bullets. And okay, that one went too far right, that one went short, whatever. And then we'll shoot our cannonball.
Yeah, and I think reinforcing that with the storytelling of how it's really helping you change the experience. And it's also helping you connect better to whatever that customer or market demand is. I think people, they can hear it rationally, maybe in a strategy presentation, but really bringing it to life through the storytelling and celebrating the people that are actually putting those behaviors into practice.
Patty, that's a good point too. Organizations, while we talk about the employee experience earlier, we're talking about how that affects the customer experience and the business outcomes. Mm-hmm. There aren't enough organizations who have even their voice of a customer program in place.
That's right, yeah.
To understand the needs of their customers, and they're still focusing on the inside out as opposed to the outside in. And the insights that you glean from that type of program should help drive enterprise strategy, whether it would be customer experience strategy, whether it be product or service strategy, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But there's not enough of that. And part of the reason is people just don't know how to do it. And
they don't know how to tell that story.
Right.
I mean,
exactly. It comes down into
you're failing to learn to create a better world or a better whatever that is, but you really need to help people make those connections.
Isn't one of the challenges going forward not to get stale in all the things that you're trying? You know, I think it's almost a constant that you've got to, it's almost created a new career path for some people who are dealing just with culture alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really how we started our firm, was all
Yeah.
around cultural shifts. Because it's so difficult for companies that have been doing it the same way to even see what their culture is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people don't really do that, almost create a cultural toolkit, because you have to really understand what you want to preserve and then what you want to change. And
Well,
then really work.
just in 9 months of COVID, I mean, let's think of all the revolutions you've gone through already, and you know, some of them work, some of them don't, some of them get stale. And I think that's where a lot of companies are at right now, just trying to figure out what else can I do, what's next.
And having that information is a problem, right? So how knowing what is stale, how do you go get it, right?
Right.
Everybody's so focused on what to do, but they're not focused on what we're learning and the data needed to help inform directional decisions, because they're so focused on making change, they're not focused on living and learning it to figure out what to change into next. And that data, whether it's operational data or effectiveness of change, you know, whatever you want to call it and whatever you want to pull, is very hard to get. You've got to figure that out. So you create a learning model of what do we learn and what are we using to move forward.
Yeah, that's a great point, Colin. You know, one thing I think we've learned is we can change a lot faster than we thought we could.
Yeah, that is true.
You know, we had a lot of clients that had been, you know, HR who've been trying to convince the company to let people work from home 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and, you know, with great resistance, and all of a sudden everybody was working from home overnight. You know, we saw the IT department say, oh, we can't support that. They figured it out.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, people are really questioning even very basic things like, could we create a paperless organization? I mean, it's really, I think, pushing people to think about how they work and how you can work in new and better ways. And maybe what we had before wasn't always the best solution, but no one questioned it. So that's really interesting.
Let me jump in, because we're about to wrap up in the next minute or so, with a couple, just an overall thought. You know, one of the things to take away from me is a constant is that, you know, we can't stop listening to our employees, and we can't stop thinking about purpose and then connecting those things. That's my bet. I wanted to just stop and say thank you to Meryl, Patricia, and Colin. Thank you for leading a great discussion. It's everybody, you know, we will be putting their materials and sending them out to everybody, as well as giving you access to, we can give you their contact information as well if you'd like to follow up with them directly on any questions. Just reminders, December 14th is our town hall. Go now, register. We're going to keep this conversation going there, as well as celebrate as best we can the holidays, and we can, and talk about how we can continue through the new year of connecting and supporting and building our community. And also, don't forget to save the date for our January program as well. Before I leave, Sue Ann, any final messages from your point of view?
No, this has been great. Thank you. We've had great interaction in the chat and questions. I know personally I've gotten a lot out of this. Hopefully all of you have as well. So thank you to our presenters, and I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving, and look forward to continuing the conversation in December at our town hall. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone, meet you.